In 1966, the BBC asked some school children what they thought the year 2000 would be like, and here's some highlights of what they said.
I think I'll probably be the spaceship to the moon dictating robots to robots, or else I may be, I don't know, in charge of a robot court, judging some robots, or I may be at the funeral of a computer, or if something's gone wrong with their nuclear bombs, I may be sort of coming back from hunting in a cave.
I don't think there is going to be atomic warfare, but I think that there is going to be all this automation. People are going to be out of work and a great population, and I think something has to be done about it. If I wasn't a biologist, that's what I'd like to do something about the population problem. Try and sort of temper it somehow. I don't know how. I think it'll be people will be regarded more as statistics than as actual people.
I think it's going to be very boring, and everything will be the same. I mean, people will be the same, and things will be the same.
There'll be so many people that they'll have to have an overflow into the sea. And so there'll be houses underneath the sea and houses above the sea.
All the Sputniks and everything that are going up sort of interferes with the weather. And I think the sea may rise and will sort of cover some of England. And there'll be just islands left from like only the Highlands in Scotland and some of the big hills in England and Wales. I don't think all England will be wiped out because some of it will be too high. I think the sea will rise to about 300 to 600 feet.
And the black people, won't be sort of separate. They'll be all mixed in with the white people. And, the poor people and rich people will become the same. Well, they will be poor and richer, but they won't sort of look down on each other.
So as you can see there, they're obviously all very optimistic about the future. Now obviously the year 2000 is now in the past, and we can see that some of that stuff definitely wasn't true. However, here in the year 2025, some of it does sound quite familiar. But anyway, that was a view of school children and what society would be like in the future. But what about music? What would children who heard music in 1966 think that music would sound like in the future? Welcome back to Revolver In-Depth, and this is episode 14, Tomorrow Never Knows. So here we are then, folks, the final track on Revolver, the closing track. And interestingly, although this is the last track on the album, it was actually the very first thing they recorded. And by far, it is the most experimental song on Revolver, and probably the most experimental song the Beatles ever did. Now strap in here because there's quite a bit to say. And I'm not going to lie, some of the stuff I say here, you're probably watching this and thinking, what the hell is he on about? And don't worry if you do think that, because there'll be points in this video where I will be speaking and thinking to myself, what the hell am I saying here? Because it gets quite technical, some of this stuff. And yeah, I thought I would include it because you need to tell the story of how this song was made, but I don't fully understand how they did it. If that makes sense, I understand what it is they're saying and what it is they've done in basic terms, but I don't understand actually how they've gone about doing it, if that makes sense. So yeah, don't worry if there's parts of this video where you think, I have no idea what he's talking about, because I don't either. So the story begins here on April 1st of 1966, where Paul McCartney took John Lennon along to Indica Books and Galleries. It was a new shop that had just been opened by McCartney's friend Barry Miles. Now, McCartney himself had invested £5,000 into this project, so yeah, he had a bit of a vested interest in it, shall we say. Anyway, it was here where Lennon bought a copy of the book The Psychedelic Experience, a manual to the Tibetan Book of the Dead by Timothy Leary, Richard Alper and Ralph Metzner. So in the book's introduction, Lennon found a line which would stick with him. When in doubt, relax, turn off your mind, float downstream. So once finished at the shop, Lennon went back to his home in Weybridge, and when he was there, he recorded himself onto tape, just reading lines from the book. And then afterwards, he played the tape back, and whilst he was playing it back, he dropped acid. So he then had an acid trip listening back to himself reading extracts from this book, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And yeah, basically he thought to himself, he had a brilliant time, and he thought, I want to make a song which is like an acid trip, that is like the psychedelic experience. So here we go. This is where it all began, the seed of Tomorrow Never Knows. Now I should point out that a lot of the stuff to do with Tomorrow Never Knows happened over the space of just a single week. So this song went in a week pretty much from not existing to being pretty much finished. We'll get onto all that. It wasn't quite finished in a week, but it wasn't far off it. Anyway, next up, so after he dropped acid and he decided he was going to write a song based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead and this idea of an acid trip, He met up with Paul McCartney and George Martin at Brian Epstein's house, where Lennon and McCartney were presenting to Martin their latest batch of songs intended for their then upcoming album. Anyway, it was here where McCartney and Martin would hear Tomorrow Never Knows for the very first time. So Lennon got his guitar out and would play the entire song in just one chord. Now both Martin and McCartney liked this new song idea, so Martin then started to figure out with the duo how they could turn this new song idea of Lennon's into a fully fledged piece of art. Virtually the entire lyrics for the song were lifted from the Psychedelic Experience book Lennon had just purchased. But yeah, the one chord thing as well, the idea of an entire song being in one chord, this was something that the Beatles liked at this point. It was very Indian sort of influence. Indian music without the entire song is often just in one chord. The Beatles liked this idea. They tried it on Rubber Soul with the song The Word, but this would be the first time really where they would properly push with the idea of just using one chord through an entire song. Now it was around this period that McCartney had discovered that if he removed the erase head on his reel-to-reel tape machine, he could saturate a recording with sound, an effect called tape loops. He'd spent a lot of his spare time recently experimenting with tape loops just for his own enjoyment, but he was now thinking about the possibility of actually using these tape loops on a Beatles record. So this is where I come back to the point I made earlier in the video about this song getting quite technical. It's with the tape loops. I don't fully understand how tape loops work, how you make a sound tape loop on. I'm guessing, I've got a rough idea of how it works, but I don't know for certain, and I don't exactly know how you create them. But yeah, anyway, McCartney in this point, he really was into his tape loops. He would just make them at home and keep them for himself. He never intended to do anything with them. And he said in later years, and he's right here, that Lennon got the hat of the most experimental Beatle. But in this period, Lennon was spending most of the time just at his house in Weybridge, not doing very much. McCartney was the only Beatle at this point who was living in central London. And when he was living in central London, he was getting fully immersed in the art scene at the time. So he was the one who did a lot of the experimental stuff first. It's just Lennon would be the one, because he's taken acid probably, is the reason, that would then put it onto albums. McCartney wasn't quite brave enough to do it yet, but a lot of Lennon's ideas, the sounds, come from McCartney's experimentation in the London art scene. The Beatles began working on Tomorrow Never Knows at Abbey Road Studios, or EMI Studios as it was known then, on April 6th of 1966. Now this was the very first session for Revolver, the very first thing they worked on. Now, throughout the entire sessions for this song, it didn't actually have a title. Now, when they came to record this, the song was less than a week old. 7 days earlier, this song didn't exist. So, throughout the duration of this session and the subsequent sessions for this song, it was simply called Mark 1. Sounds very experimental and very mysterious, Mark 1. Anyway, to begin with here, the band would work on getting the basic track nailed down. For the basic track, Starr played drums, McCartney played bass, and Harrison played tambura. Starr's drums on this were like nothing the band had ever recorded before. It was a thunderous sounding drum pattern. To achieve the sound, the tom-toms on his kit were slackened and the recording was heavily compressed and echoed. So yeah, the drums on Tomorrow Never Knows are very much the driving force. They're constant throughout the entire song. A lot of sounds, they come and go, but the drums are the only thing that is there constantly throughout. Along with McCartney's bass, that is there for most of it as well, and the bass is very closely intertwined with the drums on this song. So the band would record 3 takes of the bass track, and all 3 were like nothing the band had ever recorded up until this point. And this is one of the few times where we're actually going to talk about all 3 of these takes. So, take 1, this is the version that has been released on both 1996's Anthology 2 and 2022 Super Deluxe Edition of Revolver, Tomorrow Never Knows, take 1 on both of them. Yeah, this version, it's a bit slower than the finished version, but it still sounds nothing like the band would ever do, had done up until this point, sorry. It's not quite as experimental sounding as what it would become. I'm pleased this wasn't chosen as the master, but like I say, if you want to hear it, you can hear it on either Anthology 2 or Super Deluxe Edition of Revolver. Then there was take 2. This was an incomplete take that broke down, so nothing would ever be done with that one. And then there was take 3. This was the one deemed to be the best. So this would be the one that would be deemed to be the master and that they would start applying overdubs to. I should add as well that take 1, it was like nothing else in contemporary music at the time. Even though the Beatles considered it not good enough, it still, if they put that version out, would have sounded like nothing else that had ever happened up until that point. It's incredible, man. So anyway, the overdubs applied to take 3. The first thing to be overdubbed onto the track was Lennon's lead vocals. Lennon had told Martin that he wanted his voice to sound like the Dalai Lama chanting from a hilltop, so Martin knew that regular echo and reverb wouldn't do for this song. So in the end, 2 effects would be applied to Lennon's vocals. The first half of the song featured his voice manually double-tracked, but for the second half of the song, the Abbey Road engineers ran his voice through a revolving Leslie speaker found in a Hammond organ. The band, as well as Martin and the Abbey Road engineers, were absolutely amazed with how his voice came out sounding from this speaker. Now again, I don't quite understand how this works with the rotating speaker, because they had to somehow get his voice into this speaker, which is inside a Hammond organ. So I don't know if they had to somehow get the speaker out of the Hammond organ so that they could then use it, or if they had to somehow feed Lennon's voice through the Hammond organ. I don't know. But regardless, they finished it, they got it working, and they finished the vocals here, and then they wrapped up this day's session. Okay then folks, this is where it starts to get quite complicated, the recording of this song, because the next session took place the following day, April 7th of 1966, and this was the day where McCartney was ready to unleash his tape loops onto the world. Now prior to this day's session, he taught the other three Beatles how to create tape loops. So all four Beatles had created their own individual tape loops, and they'd all brought them into the session this day. So to start out with, the band listened to every tape loop each member had created, and then after listening to these, they selected the following 6 to use in the finished track. The first tape loop resembled the sound of a seagull, but it was actually a distorted recording of McCartney laughing. The second tape loop was an orchestra playing a B-flat chord. The third was notes played on a mellotron's flute setting. The fourth was another mellotron, this time on its violin setting. The fifth tape loop was the sound of wine glasses being rubbed, and the final tape loop was a distorted sitar played by George Harrison. Anyway, these 6 tapes were loaded onto 6 different tape machines at Abbey Road, with studio staff keeping them taut using pencils. Recording engineer Geoff Emerick would now need to complete a live mix from all 6 machines, which would then be recorded onto track 3 of the 4-track tape. The previous day's sessions had taken up the first 2 tracks of the tape. Right, I'm going to go off script a bit here, off the cuff, because I think it'll be easier to explain how this works without sticking to a script, basically. So the next thing they needed to do was record these tape loops onto the track. So, like I said, to do this, the tape machines, all 6 of them had been prepared. They were plugged into the main console so that Geoff Emerick could create a live mix. So basically what had to be done here, the Beatles, each one of them had to sit at one of these tape machines, so 2 of them would have to man 2 machines. And they would put their headphones on, and through the headphones they would hear the basic track that had been recorded. They would then, Geoff Emerick, would press record. And as they were listening along, they would turn the faders, the knobs up on the tape machines, so that the sounds of these tape loops would come up and down in the mix. And then as they did this, it was then recorded live onto track 3 of the master. See how this is quite complex? So yeah, it's all kind of much just trial and error this. Just when the Beatles felt like it, so if Paul felt like turning up, say, the seagull sounding noise, he would just do that. Then George would maybe think, oh, I'll turn my sitar up, so then he'll do that, and then he'll turn it back down and stuff like that. So it created this pretty wild, far out sound, but it worked anyway. I don't know how many attempts they did of this. It's maybe just the first time round they did it. But it also means that this recording, it would be impossible to replicate Tomorrow Never Knows, because the way they recorded it was all very much, it was just by feel, basically. You can't replicate this. They got an urge to think, right, I'll turn it up now. All right, turn it back down. And you can't really replicate that. And it's at random points in the song. And some of them were doing different machines and stuff. So yeah, very complicated. But eventually they had managed to get the tape loops recorded onto track 3 of the tape. I hope that makes sense. I think that's how it worked. I'm sorry if I'm wrong. Like I say, I'm not technically minded. Geoff Emerick isn't alive anymore to come and explain how it was done. But that's my interpretation anyway of how they recorded the tape loops onto this song. Anyway, with the tape loops now all recorded onto take 3 of the track, the band would actually take a little break from working on Tomorrow Never Knows. It would be put away for a little while. The rest of this session, they go and start work and got to get you into my life. Go and watch the previous video if you want to hear about what the second half of this session consisted of. But yeah, for now, work stopped on Tomorrow Never Knows for a little bit anyway. So the third and final session took place a few weeks later on April 22nd of 1966, and by this point it still was using its working title of Mark I, that very robotic, ominous sounding name. It sounds like a robot from the future, doesn't it? What's this robot from the future called? It's called Mark I. That kind of thing. So yeah, it would eventually get its name at a later point. We'll come on to that, but this was now the final session for Tomorrow Never Knows, as it would become known. So during this session, the band would overdub a number of instruments onto track 4 of the tape. These instruments included an organ played by Lennon, tambourine played by Starr, and a piano played by George Martin. The final overdub for Tomorrow Never Knows would be a guitar solo played by McCartney, and with that recorded, that was the song now complete. Now at some point after completing the song, Lennon did finally come up with his title for this new song. He wanted to call it The Void, but unfortunately he chickened out. He thought that 1966 Beatles fans would not be able to cope with a song called The Void. It would be too far out for them. So instead he went for something that was called a Ringoism, Tomorrow Never Knows. For those of you that don't know what a Ringoism is, Ringo had this habit of just making phrases up. Phrases like, it's been a hard day's night. He inspired that phrase. Tomorrow Never Knows is another Ringo phrase. The first time he was known to say it was in an interview with the BBC in 1964 at Heathrow Airport. It was when the Beatles first came back from America and they got back home, and the reporter was talking to Ringo, and Ringo said the phrase, "Tomorrow never knows."
You say? Oh, yeah. Tomorrow never knows.
So yeah, this song is named after a Ringoism. Although I do think The Void was a better name. I wish they'd gone with The Void and just been brave. But yeah, Tomorrow Never Knows is still a cool title, I suppose. Revolver was released on August 5th of 1966, and Tomorrow Never Knows was sequenced as the 14th and final track on the album. It's also the 7th track on side 2 of the album. Now at the time this album came out, Tomorrow Never Knows was considered groundbreaking. Nothing like this had ever been done before. This just blew people's minds, this song. Now, despite all the praise this song got for its groundbreaking recording techniques, Lennon would actually later say that he was dissatisfied with how it turned out. In his head, he'd imagined it sounding like something with thousands of monks chanting in the background, and obviously that never happened. But in his head, that's what he wanted, and obviously he never got that. And he was self-aware, it's quite impractical to record 1,000 monks chanting with the money they had. Plus, how were they ever going to do that? But that's what he wanted, so Lennon wasn't quite so happy how it turned out. It must be annoying that when you're an artist and you have an idea in your head, and when it's created, it doesn't sound like how it sounds in your head, how you wanted it to sound. If that makes sense. So yeah, Lennon wasn't quite satisfied with how this song turned out. There is nothing like this song. It is brilliant and I absolutely love it. Now I'd like to start off here by making the point that when this song was recorded in April 1966, just 3 years prior to that in 1963, the band had just released their debut album, Please Please Me, with songs like Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You and stuff like that on it. And what I'm trying to say is in 3 years, 3 very short years, they went from writing a song like Love Me Do to a song like Tomorrow Never Knows. I mean, find me one other band, one other musician in history that has developed at that kind of speed. There isn't any. Nobody else has developed at that kind of speed. It is unfathomable. It is breathtaking. It is mind-blowing how fast the Beatles developed. I mean, who else has done this? The Beatles, man, they're the greatest band of all time. You cannot argue they are not when they can develop at this kind of speed. It's unfathomable, man. Now, Revolver has had some pretty experimental tracks on it, but this one blows the rest of them out the water. They have purposely, I know I've mentioned a few times in this series about the sequencing of songs on this album, but they have purposely made sure the most experimental song comes last. It's what the entire album has been building to this. The other experimental songs, which are pretty experimental songs like I'm Only Sleeping and Love You Too, they're pretty tame in comparison to this. I mean, this is far out stuff. Yeah, there was, like I say, the recording techniques as well that we used to make this song was groundbreaking. There was nothing like this that had ever been done before. And it's worth pointing out as well that at the time, every sound you can hear on this song has been done by hand. It is all manual production. These days, even though this song would still be pretty hard to replicate and make, it would be done using computers and AI and stuff like that to help you. You didn't have that back then. All the sounds here were done manually by tape loops for the most part, having to fiddle on with knobs and stuff like that. It's unfathomable, man. I mean, the Beatles, George Martin, Jeff Emerick, the lot of them deserve all the praise they get for this song because it is a groundbreaking piece of popular music. I do wish, like I said, that Lennon had stuck with the name The Void because I think it's a cooler name than Tomorrow Never Knows. I get why they went with Tomorrow Never Knows, but I just think The Void, it's such a cool phrase. Plus, it's actually a lyric in the song. I think Void? The Void is mentioned in the song, is it? I've drawn a blank now on the lyrics. But speaking of the lyrics, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Timothy Leary probably should have got co-writing credit for the lyrics on here since, well, did he write that book? Because it was obviously a reinterpretation of the original Tibetan Book of the Dead, so maybe he shouldn't, I don't know, but he didn't anyway. But the lyrics are brilliant. Turn off your mind, relax and float downstream. It is not dying. Lay down all thoughts, surrender to the void. Play the game, existence to the end of the beginning. It's, you know, it's trippy, far out stuff, but it's bloody brilliant stuff as well. Now, I'd like to come back to what I was talking about at the start of this video with those kids who were predicting what society would be like in 2000. Now, the reason that clip's interesting is because it was recorded in 1966. And those kids, at the time, what would be fresh music to them would be a song like Tomorrow Never Knows. And I imagine to those kids, if they'd asked them, what do you think music would sound like in the year 2000? They would probably pick something like, oh, what Tomorrow Never Knows sounds like. Because there was nothing else at the time that sounded like this. I mean, look at what else was being recorded. Even by the other big bands of the time, the Stones, the Kinks, etc., the Who. None of them were making songs that sounded anything like Tomorrow Never Knows. And to be honest, music has never reached this point. Even now, when I put Tomorrow Never Knows on, I listen to Tomorrow Never Knows and I think, that sounds like the future. It still, to this day, sounds like the future. I mean, Revolver now, next year it'll be 60 years old, so Tomorrow Never Knows will be 60 next year. And 60 years on, this song, it still sounds like the future. It still feels like music has not reached this level. I mean, you look at someone contemporary like Taylor Swift or Ed Sheeran, or Coldplay or Beyonce or stuff like that, all their music is so fucking tame in comparison to this song. I mean, this song sounds like the future. They sound like relics of the past in comparison to this song. It's mind-blowing, it really is. And yeah, I'm rambling on here and going on, so I will conclude the video here. But basically, this song, it is a masterpiece. It is a groundbreaking piece of music. It is a groundbreaking recording technique. It was all done by hand, manually as well. And it still sounds like the future. I mean, how many songs from the past still sound like the future, especially from so long ago now, 60 years ago? It's incredible, it really is. So that concludes another episode of Revolver In-Depth, folks. Once again, thank you very much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, go on then, do what Paul's doing. Give it a thumbs up, man, you know, be very much appreciated. All right. Yeah, like the video, thank you. Leave a comment as well. What do you think of this song? Do you think this is one of the most groundbreaking songs ever made? Do you think this song still sounds like the future? Or do you not like it? What's wrong with you if you don't like it? But if you don't like it, let me know. Be interested to know why. If you're not subscribed to this channel, well, please do subscribe. That would greatly mean the world to me. There's also a playlist on this channel called Revolver In-Depth, which will consist of all previous episodes on this series. Since this is the last track on Revolver, the entire album is now in that playlist, so you can see every single track and hear all about them on this album. But we're not done. There's still 2 more episodes to come. So join me next time here on Revolver In-Depth, where we're going to be taking a look at the A-side of the non-album single of the time, because Paul wants to be a paperback writer.